In Conversation on Revelation Television. Today the topic under discussion is abortion, and I have as my guest Philippa Taylor. Welcome, Philippa.
Thank you.
Philippa is a consultant with CARE, CARE being Christian Action, Research and Education. Philippa, you are married to Martin. You have 3 teenage children. And some of our viewers may remember Philippa from the debate that we did some time back on marriage and cohabitation. Today we've invited you back to talk to us about abortion, because in your work for CARE and CMF, Christian Medical Fellowship, you've done a lot of work on abortion and any issues surrounding that. So welcome back, and thank you for agreeing to talk to us on this topic. So abortion is almost always in the news. There's people talk about it, there's huge media coverage, parliamentary debates, always seem to be current. But before we move on to that, give me a very quick overview in the UK, where we stand on abortion, legally, medically, etc.
Okay. Well, abortion was basically made legal under the 1967 Abortion Act, but it's only legal for certain criteria. So although it is regarded in the UK as being kind of abortion on demand, so pretty well any woman who wants to have an abortion can get an abortion, which is true, she can. Technically and legally, she actually has to fulfill certain criteria, and 2 doctors have to agree that she has a need for this abortion under certain criteria. The most kind of popular one that's used is that if she doesn't have an abortion, there's a risk to her mental health being adversely affected. So she has to explain to the doctor that she needs it for mental health reasons. And that accounts for about 97% of abortions in the UK. There's about 1% of abortions are permitted right up to birth, for if there's a chance that the baby will be severely handicapped. And just in terms of, so that's the basic law.
I'm going to divert you right now, because this has always interested me. In 1967, all right, in those days, it was shameful for a young girl out of wedlock to have a baby. Therefore, it was relatively easy to argue that it would affect her mental health. In 2014, everybody's having babies out of wedlock. So why would it be arguable that having a baby for a 16-year-old unmarried girl would affect her mental health? Because it's normal. Everybody's doing it.
Well, I mean, it's technically it's a criteria. Basically, all a doctor needs to do if he wants to sign the form for a girl is just to agree that actually it would be more, I suppose you could almost say more stressful, more difficult for her to continue with a pregnancy than to have an abortion. So it's a pretty it is, in effect, it's pretty meaningless, but technically the reason that those who are very pro-abortion and want to liberalise the law and get rid of those clauses altogether is they say that women, no girl or woman, should have to go to a doctor and explain her circumstances and get him to sign. Most who are pro-abortion would say a woman should just be able to go and have an abortion if she wants it without having to explain any reason. So there's a kind of technicality, but at the same time, that law is very important for doctors who don't want to necessarily sign the form and allow a woman to have an abortion if they have any conscientious objection, or if they have another reason to say, actually, this abortion is not going to help you. It does still give a little bit of leeway and help to those doctors who are concerned about the issue. And just coming back to the numbers are staggering for the amount of abortions that take place in the UK. Over 200,000 a year. About 600 abortions take place every day, in effect, that means, in the UK. 1 in 3 women will have had an abortion, which means that a lot of women in churches will have had an abortion, either because they've become Christians, more recently have had an abortion before they were a Christian, or even many Christians as well, because it's sadly, such a common procedure in the UK, and over 7 million abortions have taken place in the UK since the 67 Act. And we sometimes forget the quantity and the magnitude of what's happening in the UK on abortion, which is why it's an issue that I've been so concerned about for so many years.
So so far we've talked about the law, the statistics, the factual matters. You're a committed Christian. This is a Christian television station. What does the Bible say about abortion? I mean, the word abortion is never actually used in the Bible, although obviously reference is made to, life and sanctity of life and killing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's right, it isn't. I think I would guess most listeners will probably be aware of the debate amongst Christians about when life begins, because that's the key issue, is what does the Bible say about when life begins in the womb? Is the fetus, which is a technical medical term for the baby in the womb, is that a person, is that a human being or not? And so ignoring all medical and scientific and biological and philosophical arguments, let's look at what the Bible says. And again, most listeners will be, or people who are watching will be aware of some of the key biblical Bible verses and principles. But let me personalise this and say the two main passages that I find the most helpful on this and justifying the humanity of the unborn child are Psalm 139, which actually is one of John Stott's favourite verses and passages that enable us to reflect on when life begins. So Psalm 139, you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. And what Stott says is that basically reflects the humanity of the unborn child, the fact that that child is in communion and has a relationship with God. And the psalmist is referring to the baby in the womb as himself in the same person as he says he is now. So he doesn't see any difference in continuity between the baby in the womb and now. My favourite passage, or the most helpful passage for myself, is when the Bible talks about Jesus being conceived in the womb and born of his mother Mary. And that's Luke 1:31. Behold, you'll conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you'll call his name Jesus. So I think, incredibly, Jesus came incarnate as an embryo, and that to me says that the embryo, therefore, is of equal value to any of us who are already born. And then just quickly adding on, of course, we have verses about do not kill because we're made in God's image and the commandment not to kill. And without going into any detail, I think if you mix all of those up together, we have it's clear in the Bible that abortion has to be wrong. But it doesn't say for definite. So I think those who would argue against, or argue maybe that abortion could be allowed in very difficult circumstances, I think they have to actually, the onus is on those to disprove that the baby in the womb is not human.
I think we can accept that the majority Christian view, the majority of our viewers, would accept that abortion is wrong.
Yeah.
However, that's not what the majority of people think. And their argument is the progressive argument that the baby becomes progressively viable. The argument isn't should there be abortion or not. The argument is, well, at what point does the switchover take place? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the main belief of most people will be a sort of, they'll believe that a fetus gradually acquires humanity and value in the womb. So the very early embryo, very early baby, they would see just as a bundle of cells, not worth anything. But once you get to a point of viability, or when you can see that a baby looks like a baby in the womb, at that point most people think, well, it acquires some rights. Obviously, for an extreme few, those rights will not be acquired until, or equal rights are not acquired until birth.
But there's no logical line in the sand, is there?
No,
there's
absolutely.
No scientific...
It's utterly arbitrary.
It is arbitrary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the important point. The least arbitrary point, of course, is conception. That's when a new life comes into being. Any point after that, you're taking an arbitrary line saying, oh, perhaps it depends on whether they have feelings or sentience or what you can see as
well, survivability is one, right?
Yeah, that's right, which varies, of course, because babies can survive, now at 23 weeks occasionally. So, I mean, the point of viability is even changing, so that's utterly arbitrary as well. But we are dealing with a gradualist approach from most people, and we've got to accept that. But I think one of the issues... the whole issue of abortion for people who aren't Christians is not just about when life begins. We're talking, really, I think it's important to raise this point, that we're talking about two patients, or two people here. We're talking about a baby in the womb, but we're also talking about a mother and the decisions that a mother has to take about that, and the consequences for a mother in making decisions about abortion, and the effect and the risk to a mother's health. So there's a whole new area that we need to also think about.
Well, okay, so it can be argued it's all very well for you Christians to say abortion is wrong, and that is it, and, why are you so definitive about it? And maybe there's a case for saying, well, mental health is just inconvenience, may not be the right reason. But is there an argument for saying there are some situations where abortion is not just the best option, is the only option because of the circumstances? Yes, all right, let's eliminate the it's inconvenient. Let's eliminate the, well, it's going to make life a little bit more difficult for me. I'm not going to be able to enjoy and go out to parties on Friday nights and have this baby.
Yeah, no, for superficial reasons. There are some difficult situations. I mean, first, it's important to, I think, as Christians, well, certainly myself, I believe very strongly that abortion is wrong. And I believe that the baby in the womb has a value and is a human from the beginning. There's a big question about how much we can impose our beliefs on people who aren't Christians. And I think that we have to be very careful about imposing our beliefs. And I think that actually women have to be able to make choices, and they have to make choices, make decisions themselves. We cannot force a woman not to have an abortion or to have an abortion. What we can do, though, is provide information and support for women so that they can make properly informed decisions. Now, let's look at certain circumstances, which is what you're asking. There are really difficult circumstances sometimes for some women, for many women. I've been through one recently, not myself, but through someone close to myself, a younger, in fact, a friend of my teenage daughter, who left school, got into a relationship with someone, and in a kind of gap year, then became pregnant. Both she and her partner really wanted the child. Parents dead against it because they were concerned about daughter's education and the fact that she was going to drop out of education completely. Then everything went pear-shaped, partner left. So this young girl is left with no partner, parents against her having a child, and the rest of the family against her having a child, knowing that she'll be left with a child and basically having to drop out of education. So what does she do in those circumstances? Or everything is conspiring against her keeping the child, yet she deep down actually wanted to have that child, but she has no support. Sadly, the outcome, because I'm not directly related to her, she had the termination, she had the abortion, sadly. So parents are happy. She's going to carry on with her education. It seems like abortion was the solution. From my perspective, there was a big problem here in that if I had been more closely involved and were able to, the thing that I would have said that she desperately needed at that point is support and information, those two things. If she had been able to, and this is what I would say to someone in these circumstances, if you could do anything to get this young girl along to a centre where she can get help from people who will say, look, this is really difficult, but we will give you support, we will help you practically, we will tell you how you can go through your education despite having a child, as a single mum you can do it, we will back you up and we will help you, we will provide for your needs, we'll show you how you can get the money and everything. If she had the support, that would help. If she had the information also to tell her that abortion is not actually the easy answer. Abortion has adverse consequences, especially if she wants to keep that child. She is facing a real problem if she has the termination, because it's going against what her heart wants, and that will potentially cause real problems for her in the future when she has to come to terms, or may never come to terms, with the loss of that child. So that's what I'd love her to have had, support and information.
But when you talk about support, in practical terms, what are you talking about? Are you talking about local churches that are geared up to local churches that are because most local churches may not be sufficiently educated in abortion issues to be able to help a teenage girl?
Yeah, it's
or
an
are you
absolute
talking
challenge.
about specific charitable
Both.
organizations? Are you Christian organizations, secular? What are you talking about in terms of help?
This girl is not a Christian.
Okay.
This one. So she would not go to a church, okay? But she would potentially go somewhere else. So if there were any secular charity that was set up that was not biased and did not have a vested interest in her having an abortion, which unfortunately is the case with a lot of abortion providers. They tend to have a rather vested interest, obviously, in her carrying out and having a termination. But if you can get somewhere that is completely unbiased, will give her unbiased advice and give her support practically and for many years, and show her actually that it is possible to carry on and keep this baby, then that's fine. The reality is most of these counselling centres and most of the places that do offer support for girls in difficult situations actually tend to be church organisations. There are an increasing number of churches that do set up centres and have set up centres, and they're trying to work with the local services, so local GPs and hospitals or whatever, and schools, so that they get lots of referrals. And they are very clear now about operating operating within the law and being very careful that they don't present an overtly sort of Christian or religious perspective, but simply present a woman with time and space and information and options, and give a woman the chance to choose, knowing all the facts, knowing all the support and all the help. So yeah, in answer to your question, the more churches that can support centres like this and support the provision and information to girls in these difficult situations, the better. It's a desperate need. Yeah.
The second element that you mentioned, the first being support, practical help. Mm-hmm. The second element was had an educational aspect to it, mm-hmm. in terms of informing this girl, mm-hmm. the consequences to her body, mm-hmm. the consequences to her psychology, the consequences mm-hmm. to her emotions that she may not have thought through in any kind of depth. She was looking at her education, she was looking at her boyfriend having left her, she was looking mm-hmm. at her parents' mm-hmm. wishes. The other side of the coin is looking at how it will impact her.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a big issue, this, that is brushed under the carpet too much, and there's very, very little known. Now, this girl will have been told nothing, I suspect, about any of the long-term consequences, potential long-term consequences for her. And there's research, but also there's anecdotal evidence, plenty of anecdotal, and I've done my own research interviewing women about the adverse effects on a woman emotionally and for her mental health in the long term from having an abortion. There aren't, you can't put absolute figures on it, but I've done some research for an MA that I did, and I interviewed women who'd had the criteria as to women who'd had an abortion up to anything between 5 and 30 years previously, and even women who'd had an abortion 30 years previously, some of them were very badly affected by it 30 years later. So there's a real potential for women to be to suffer with depression, with sometimes drinking, extra drinking, and drugs, and bad relationships, and mentally to feel guilty, often very tearful. The women I interviewed would just, an abortion 15, 20 years ago, they were still tearful about it and feeling really bad. Now, it is possible to work through that with courses and counselling, but mental health effects are brushed under the carpet, but are very real for a large number of people. But there's still physical effects too, and physical consequences.
So where can Christians go to get educated on these issues and also get involved? I mean, if a Christian lady or a man came across a teenage girl contemplating abortion, mm-hmm. and where could they go to get up on this? Yeah, I mean, in terms of information, sort of factual information, the Christian Medical Fellowship provides quite a lot of resources on factual information, and so does CARE, Christian Action Research and Education. But one of the great organisations that runs a lot of centres, counselling centres, and that is a great place to go to for women in these circumstances, to go and find out what other women have experienced and to find sort of practical help as well as emotional help and support and counselling, would be Care Confidential. And they're a great organisation that have basically run a network of centres, counselling centres. And anyone could go to one of the Care Confidential website and find a local centre, so somewhere close to them, and then they could go to that local centre and get the help that they need. But in terms of practical resources, both the websites, and CARE, Christian Medical Fellowship, Care Confidential, and Life too, they're also a very good source of information, help, centres, and practical support long term. So all of those would be good places to go to. Do you have any examples of older ladies in their 30s, perhaps, or older, who contemplating? I mean, when you talk about abortion, most people, I suppose, think about teenagers.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Not always teenagers, is
no,
it?
And interestingly, one of the fastest growing groups of women who are getting terminations and abortions statistically now, the fastest growing group, it's not the largest proportion, but the fastest growing group is actually older women who are going for terminations. And a lot of those will be simply because they say they can't afford it. They've already got 1 or 2 children. They don't want to have any more. And it affects careers and jobs and things like that. So, yeah, older women are certainly one of the faster growing groups of people who do go for terminations, which is tragic.
That's a worrying trend, isn't it?
Yeah. But and sadly, the numbers of abortions are high, and they're not going down at the moment at all. So all ages.
So in the last 4 minutes that we have, tell me about what's happening in Parliament.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in Parliament at the moment, actually. Interesting. There's a lot in the media about abortion. There's a lot in Parliament. Okay. Just recently, one MP initiated a debate in Parliament on gender abortions. So she was basically wanting a debate and wanting MPs to vote and pass a law, which won't become law because it's a technicality, but it's raising the profile, to say that abortion for sex, for gender, so mainly female fetuses, should not be aborted, because it has been found out through undercover investigations that there are quite a few terminations taking place in the UK simply because a baby's female. And so she's saying that should be outlawed.
That's been going on in China and other places.
Absolutely,
for years,
yeah. And unfortunately, it's happening in the UK as well. I mean, it's huge in other countries, but even in the UK, it's happening. And this is what this particular MP, Fiona Bruce, wants to outlaw and make absolutely clear that the law in the UK should not allow any abortion for gender, and any doctor that does that should be prosecuted. So that's one big debate, the whole issue of gender abortions. But she's also initiated quite a lot of work on making sure that abortion is not allowed for disability, because a lot of abortions take place in the UK right up to birth if a baby is disabled, and that's clearly discriminatory as well as utterly wrong. So she's doing a lot to try and say that actually abortion for disability should not be allowed.
But given that one of the reasons for legal abortion is saying, well, this is going to impact my mental health, couldn't the argument be made, if I have a girl, it will impact my mental health, or if I have a disabled child, it will impact my mental health? I can't cope with a disabled child coming out of my womb.
Well, both of those are the arguments that people use to say that I want to have an abortion because I've got a female baby. And sometimes for women it's very difficult, because a husband or partner or family will be saying, we don't want any more female children, because obviously for certain ethnic groups it's more important that they have a male heir. But that doesn't make it right at all, and it's highly discriminatory.
Well, first of all, abortion's not right, and secondly, discrimination is not right.
Yeah. And for both disability and for gender abortions, they're both very discriminatory against women and discriminatory against disability. It's interesting, isn't it? As soon as a baby is born, at the point of birth, there's a whole panoply of rights come in for disabled children, so they're treated with extra rights almost. You cannot discriminate against anyone who is disabled once they're born. Before they're born, discrimination is allowed. Even under the Act, it's allowed. And so this is what's so wrong. From the point of birth, all the rights to females, to disabled children, adults, but before birth, very few rights. And this is what needs to be changed in the law. So there's also big debates going on about when abortion should be allowed. At the moment it's allowed up to 20 weeks or 24 weeks, up to birth for disability. And some people, there's quite a lot of debate saying, look, we need to drop the abortion limit to only 20 weeks because of viability, because so many more babies can survive past sort of 22, 23 weeks. So having a 24-week limit is crazy, because babies could survive before that.
So when we talk very, very quickly, what does pre-signing forms mean?
Yes, it's been interesting. So there was, again, when I mentioned earlier that 2 doctors need to be able to sign a notification form to say that a woman can have an abortion, what was happening, our undercover investigations found that they weren't signing when a woman came in and said, I want an abortion, said, OK, we'll sign and say, yes, you can have one. What was happening was some doctors had got a whole load of forms and they just signed them all and left them to one side, some of them even photocopied, so that later when a woman comes into a clinic or whatever and says, I want an abortion, one doctor would sign something that already had the other doctor's signature on it. So in other words, it was basically saying that people were that it was making a complete farce of the whole need to have 2 doctors saying that this woman should have an abortion. And those doctors have been under investigation, but unfortunately no one's prosecuting them.
Well, Philippa, again, we're out of time. But thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk about abortion.
Welcome.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that's of great interest to our viewers. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me.
Everybody, this is Kirk Franklin. You're watching Revelation TV, Church Without Walls.
Lord, I reach for you. Lead me to your heart. And I thirst for you. Draw me deeper still. Close enough to feel, close enough to feel the cadence of your heart. For justice, Lord. God, give us a heart tonight. Streams of justice flow to the least of these. Take us, Lord. Take us, Lord. Oh
Previously, on Today with God, we learned of a secret night meeting between Jesus and a respected religious leader. Jesus was poor, while the Jewish ruler was an elite member of society in ancient Israel. Some of the influential citizens were upset by the bold message of Jesus, but the common people believed in him. Many came to understand that Jesus was the Son of God and our Savior.